The warm glow of candles flickered across the Thanksgiving table as my brother's family gathered for their annual feast. The dining room at Jonathan and Miranda's house was Pinterest perfect, complete with fall decorations and a turkey that looked like it belonged in a magazine. At 38, I had spent 13 years building my clinical psychology practice, but sitting at this table, I felt like the family disappointment once again. My name is Dr. Catherine Wells, and I specialize in adolescent psychology and trauma therapy. My office walls are lined with degrees: PhD in clinical psychology from Northwestern, post-doctoral fellowship in adolescent behavioral therapy, board certification in trauma-informed care. But to my sister-in-law Miranda, I was just someone who got paid to listen to people's problems. Miranda Hartwell-Wells had married my younger brother Jonathan 5 years ago, and from the beginning she'd made it clear that she considered my profession less than legitimate. As a corporate attorney specializing in mergers and acquisitions, she dealt in concrete outcomes: contracts signed, deals closed, millions earned. Psychology, in her view, was soft science at best, complete nonsense at worst. "Catherine, how's your little practice going?" Miranda asked as she carved the turkey with surgical precision. Her tone was polite enough to fool casual observers, but I caught the subtle emphasis on little. Everything about Miranda was calculated, from her perfectly styled blonde bob to her designer sweater that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. "Very well, thank you," I replied, helping myself to stuffing. "I've been working with several adolescents who've made remarkable progress this year." Miranda's 15-year-old daughter Sophia looked up from her phone. "What kind of progress, Aunt Catherine?" I smiled at my niece, one of the few bright spots in these family gatherings. Sophia was intelligent and curious, though lately she'd seemed more withdrawn than usual. "Well, I helped one teenager who was having panic attacks learn coping strategies that got her back in school. Another student I worked with had been self-harming, and we developed healthier ways for her to manage difficult emotions." "That's amazing," Sophia said, her eyes lighting up with genuine interest. Miranda set down her carving knife with a sharp clink. "Sophia, eat your dinner. And Catherine, I'm sure you mean well, but let's be honest about what you actually do." The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Jonathan shifted uncomfortably beside his wife, shooting me an apologetic look. My parents, who'd driven up from Florida for the holiday, suddenly found their plates fascinating. "I'm not sure what you mean," I said carefully, though I had a sinking feeling I knew exactly where this was heading. Miranda's smile was razor-sharp. "Anyone can listen to people complain for money. You sit in an office and nod sympathetically while teenagers whine about their feelings. It's not exactly brain surgery." The words hit like a physical blow. 13 years of education, thousands of hours of supervised clinical work, board certifications, ongoing training, all dismissed as professional hand-holding. I felt my face flush with anger and embarrassment. "Miranda," Jonathan said quietly, "Catherine has a PhD. She's licensed by the state." "Oh please," Miranda waved dismissively. "Half the people calling themselves therapists these days have online degrees and a weekend certification. The whole industry is full of quacks preying on people's insecurities." I gripped my napkin under the table, using a grounding technique I taught my clients. "Count 5 things you can see: the centerpiece, Miranda's wedding ring, Sophia's concerned expression, my brother's red face, the half-carved turkey. For things you can hear: the ticking clock, muffled football commentary from the living room, my father clearing his throat, Miranda's voice continuing its assault. I mean, really, Catherine, what measurable outcomes do you provide? Can you point to concrete results? When I close a deal, there's a clear success metric. When you," she gestured vaguely, "talk to sad teenagers, what exactly have you accomplished?" The room was completely silent except for the sound of my mother's nervous breathing. Sophia had stopped eating entirely, her fork suspended halfway to her mouth as she stared at her mother in horror. "Mom," Sophia said quietly, "that's really mean." "It's not mean, sweetheart, it's realistic," Miranda replied, patting her daughter's hand condescendingly. "Catherine, I'm sure you help people feel better temporarily, but real problems require real solutions. Legal problems, financial problems, career problems, those need experts with actual expertise." I set down my fork and took a deep breath. Every instinct screamed at me to defend my profession, to list my credentials, to explain the peer-reviewed research supporting evidence-based therapy. Instead, I did what I'd learned to do with difficult clients. I stayed calm and refused to be baited. You know what? You might be right, I said quietly, standing up. Why don't I help clear the table and start on dishes? Mom, would you like me to wrap up some leftovers for you and Dad? Miranda looked almost disappointed that I hadn't taken the bait. She'd clearly been prepared for an argument, ready to demolish my defenses with her superior logic and concrete achievements. My refusal to engage seemed to deflate her momentarily. As I carried plates to the kitchen, I heard Jonathan's voice, low and angry. Miranda, that was completely out of line. Catherine has helped hundreds of people. Oh, stop being so sensitive. I wasn't attacking her personally. I'm just pointing out that some professions have more societal value than others. In the kitchen, I ran hot water over the dishes and tried to process what had just happened. Miranda's words echoed in my mind. Anyone can listen to people complain for money. The dismissal stung not just because it was cruel, but because it revealed such profound ignorance about what I actually did. Just that week, I'd worked with a 16-year-old who'd been contemplating suicide until we developed a safety plan that quite literally saved his life. I'd helped a 14-year-old girl process sexual assault trauma using EMDR therapy. I'd taught a 17-year-old with severe anxiety disorder cognitive behavioral techniques that allowed him to take his SATs and apply for college. But to Miranda, all of that was just listening to complaints. Aunt Catherine. Sophia appeared beside me, drying dishes with unusual enthusiasm. I'm really sorry about what Mom said. That was awful. I looked at my niece, noting the dark circles under her eyes that hadn't been there at last year's Thanksgiving. Thank you, sweetheart. That means a lot. She gets like this sometimes, Sophia continued quietly, glancing toward the dining room. Especially when she's stressed about work. She's been working on some huge case, staying at the office until like midnight every night. That sounds difficult for the whole family, I said carefully. Sophia nodded, then hesitated. Aunt Catherine, can I ask you something? Of course. If someone wanted to talk to a therapist, how would they? Would their parents have to know? Every alarm bell in my professional mind started ringing. I set down the plate I was washing and gave Sophia my full attention. In most states, teenagers over 14 can consent to their own mental health treatment. But Sophia, are you okay? Is there something you want to talk about? Before she could answer, Miranda's voice cut through the kitchen. Sophia, come help me serve dessert. And Catherine, thank you for cleaning up. I know it's probably more fulfilling than your usual work. The barb was delivered with a smile, but it landed just as sharply as intended. Sophia shot me an apologetic look and disappeared back into the dining room. The rest of the evening passed in polite tension. Miranda held court at the dinner table, regaling everyone with stories of her latest corporate victories while making subtle digs about touchy-feely professions and people who think emotions are more important than facts. I smiled, nodded, and counted the minutes until I could leave. Driving home to my quiet apartment, I reflected on the evening. Miranda's contempt wasn't unusual. I'd encountered plenty of people who dismissed psychology as pseudoscience or glorified friendship. What bothered me most was the effect her attitude might have on Sophia, who clearly needed someone to talk to but was trapped in a family that viewed emotional support as weakness. Over the next few months, I threw myself into my practice with renewed dedication. I worked with a teenage girl recovering from an eating disorder, helping her family understand the complex psychological factors behind her condition. I provided therapy for a 17-year-old boy whose parents were divorcing, teaching him healthy coping mechanisms for the guilt and anger he was experiencing. Each success felt like a quiet victory against voices like Miranda's that reduced my work to listening to complaints. In February, I received an unexpected call from my brother. Catherine, I need to ask you something and I need you to keep it confidential. Jonathan's voice was strained with stress and exhaustion. Of course. What's going on? It's Sophia. She's in some legal trouble. The school called the police because they found marijuana in her locker and now there are charges. Miranda's handling the legal side, but the court is requiring therapy as part of a diversion program. I set down my coffee, immediately shifting into professional mode. What kind of therapy requirement? That's the thing. It has to be with a licensed clinical psychologist who specializes in adolescent behavioral issues. The court was very specific about the credentials required. The irony wasn't lost on me. Jonathan, I specialize in exactly that area. I know. That's why I'm calling. Miranda is resistant to the idea of Sophia seeing you. She's been trying to find alternatives, but everyone she's contacted either doesn't meet the court's requirements or has a months-long waiting list. What does Sophia want? Jonathan sighed heavily. She specifically asked for you. She said she trusts you and feels comfortable talking to you. But Miranda is convinced that going to a family member for therapy is inappropriate and unprofessional. I considered the ethical implications carefully. Jonathan, normally I wouldn't treat a family member due to boundary issues. But if Sophia specifically requested me and other qualified options aren't available, I could make an exception. The court-mandated therapy is time-sensitive, right? She has to start within 2 weeks or face more serious consequences. Let me check my schedule and see what I can do. That evening Miranda called me directly. Her voice was crisp and professional, but I could hear the underlying desperation. Catherine, I understand Jonathan spoke to you about Sophia's situation. Yes, I'm sorry you're all going through this. It must be very stressful. I want to be clear that this is purely a practical arrangement. Sophia needs to fulfill the court requirement, and you happen to meet the technical qualifications. Technical qualifications. The same credentials she dismissed as meaningless 6 months earlier were now the only things standing between her daughter and more serious legal consequences. I understand, Miranda. My primary concern is helping Sophia navigate this situation successfully. Good. I've researched the court requirements extensively and they're quite specific. The therapist must be a licensed clinical psychologist with specialized training in adolescent behavioral issues and substance abuse intervention. They also require documented experience with court-mandated therapy protocols. I almost smiled. Miranda had essentially listed my exact qualifications. The same qualifications she dismissed as anyone being able to listen to people complain for money. I meet all those requirements, I said simply. Yes, well, I've called 7 other psychologists, and they're either not qualified for court-mandated work or have waiting lists that extend past Sophia's deadline. I see. There was a long pause. Catherine, I want you to understand that this doesn't change my opinion about your field in general. This is simply a practical necessity. Of course, Miranda. When would you like to schedule Sophia's first appointment? My first session with Sophia revealed a teenager in crisis. Beneath the surface of her legal troubles was a complex web of anxiety, perfectionism, and family pressure that had led her to self-medicate with marijuana. She was struggling with panic attacks, insomnia, and overwhelming pressure to maintain perfect grades while managing her parents' increasingly strained marriage. Aunt Catherine, I feel like I'm drowning, Sophia confided during our second session. Mom expects me to be perfect all the time. She says emotions are weaknesses and that successful people don't need therapy. But I can't sleep, I can't concentrate, and sometimes I feel like I can't breathe. Over the following weeks, I worked with Sophia using evidence-based techniques I'd spent years perfecting. We explored cognitive behavioral therapy to address her anxiety, developed healthy coping strategies to replace substance use, and created a safety plan for managing panic attacks. The progress was measurable and significant, exactly the kind of concrete outcomes Miranda claimed didn't exist in psychology. 6 weeks into treatment, I was required to submit a progress report to the court. The document detailed Sophia's improvements: decreased anxiety scores on standardized assessments, improved sleep patterns, development of healthy coping mechanisms, and consistent engagement with treatment goals. It was the kind of measurable, evidence-based reporting that contradicted everything Miranda had said about my profession. During our 8th session, Sophia arrived looking lighter somehow, more like the confident teenager I remembered from family gatherings. I wanted to thank you, she said as we settled into our usual chairs. I know Mom didn't want me to see you, and I know she said some pretty awful things about your work. Sophia, your mother was stressed and worried about you. People sometimes say things they don't mean when they're frightened. No, Aunt Catherine, she meant it. But she was wrong. Sophia looked directly at me. What you do isn't fake. You've literally saved my life. I was thinking about hurting myself before we started talking. Now I have tools to handle the bad days and I feel like I can actually get through this. The session ended with Sophia's court-mandated therapy successfully completed. Her progress report showed remarkable improvement across all measured areas, and the court dismissed her charges in recognition of her successful treatment compliance. That evening Miranda called me. "Catherine, I wanted to discuss Sophia's treatment outcome." Of course. I'm pleased with her progress. The court supervisor called today. They were impressed with Sophia's improvement and the quality of your documentation. Apparently, your treatment plan exceeded their expectations for court-mandated therapy. I'm glad to hear that. There was a long pause. "Catherine, I owe you an apology." I waited, letting the silence stretch. What I said at Thanksgiving was unfair and uninformed. I didn't understand what you actually do and I let my own biases cloud my judgment. Thank you for saying that, Miranda. The supervisor mentioned that your approach was particularly effective because of your specialized training in trauma-informed adolescent therapy. She said finding psychologists with your specific qualifications and experience is quite difficult. I've spent years developing expertise in this area. Another pause. She also mentioned that your treatment documentation was the most thorough and professional she'd seen in court-mandated cases. Apparently, your evidence-based approach and measurable outcomes set a new standard for their program. Measurable outcomes. Evidence-based approach. The same concepts Miranda had insisted didn't exist in psychology were now being praised by court officials. I'm pleased the treatment was successful for Sophia. Catherine, I want you to know that Sophia has asked to continue seeing you on a voluntary basis. She says you've given her tools that have changed her life. 6 months later, at Jonathan's birthday celebration, the family dynamic had shifted noticeably. Miranda was cordial, even respectful when discussing my work. Sophia was thriving. Her grades had improved, her anxiety was manageable, and she'd developed healthy friendships and interests. During dinner, someone mentioned a friend's teenager who was struggling with depression. "You should call Catherine," Miranda said without hesitation. "She specializes in adolescent psychology and her success rates are remarkable." The court system specifically seeks out psychologists with her qualifications because her evidence-based approach produces measurable results. I caught Sophia's eye across the table and she grinned. The girl who'd once been afraid to seek help was now confidently discussing mental health with her friends and advocating for therapy when needed. After dinner, as I prepared to leave, Miranda approached me privately. "Catherine, I wanted you to know that Sophia told me about her suicidal thoughts before treatment. I had no idea how serious her situation was. Miranda, I'm glad she felt safe enough to share that with you. You saved my daughter's life." Her voice was quiet, stripped of its usual corporate authority. "I spend my days negotiating million-dollar deals, but nothing I've ever done has been as important as what you did for Sophia." A year later, I received a referral from Miranda's law firm. One of the senior partner's sons was struggling with anxiety and substance use, and they specifically requested a psychologist with my qualifications and court experience. The referral came with a note. "Dr. Wells comes highly recommended by Miranda Hartwell-Wells, who credits her with saving her daughter's life through evidence-based therapy and measurable interventions." I kept that referral note in my office not out of spite, but as a reminder that sometimes the people who dismiss your work most vocally are the ones who end up needing it most desperately. Miranda had learned what I'd always known. Healing isn't about soft science or hand-holding. It's about applying rigorous training, evidence-based techniques, and specialized knowledge to help people transform their lives. The teenager who'd been afraid to seek help was now a confident high school senior planning to study psychology in college. The mother who'd mocked therapy had become one of its most vocal advocates. And the fake profession that anyone could supposedly do had proven its worth when it mattered most. When a family was in crisis and needed real expertise to heal. Sometimes the best response to those who underestimate your profession isn't argument or defensiveness. Sometimes it's simply being excellent at what you do and letting your work speak for itself. When Miranda finally needed what I offered, she discovered that listening to people isn't the same as helping them heal, and that the difference between the two requires exactly the kind of training, expertise, and dedication she'd once dismissed as worthless. In my office, beside my diplomas and certifications, I keep a photo Sophia sent me from her high school graduation. She's smiling broadly, wearing her cap and gown, holding a certificate for academic achievement. On the back she wrote, "Thank you for teaching me that asking for help isn't weakness, it's wisdom. You didn't just listen to my complaints. You gave me my life back."